In this video, we're going to be going over the first of several guided quizzes that we're going to offer in this course, and just a few things to know about these quizzes. First of all, we're trying to emulate real-world scenarios as much as possible, and for that reason, a lot of these questions are going to be lengthy, they're going to have a lot of details, and not every detail in the question may be relevant to the answers. What we're trying to do here is to help you learn to sift through an entire lengthy question and just grab exactly what you need to be able to answer that question. Second, you might find that not just one answer, but sometimes multiple answers seem to fit the question. And the reason we do that is we want you to be able to think critically, and despite more than one viable option, we want you to be able to track down the best option for every scenario. With that being said, let's get started. So number one, Jim has been tasked with creating the infrastructure to migrate his company's application to AWS. Because of how his application is built, he knows that he'll need a lot of control over the configuration of his virtual instances. He also knows that he'll need the ability to configure his virtual instances individually in some cases, and is okay with managing his own security and operating system patches. Jim's application runs on Ubuntu 16.04. What AWS compute service is best for Jim? Is it 1, AWS Lambda, 2, AWS EC2, 3, ECS, or 4, Lightsail? Feel free to take a moment and pause this video while you think of your answer. And the answer to this one is number 2, AWS EC2. So let's run down the answers here and find out why that's the best fit. The first option was AWS Lambda. And if you recall, Lambda was a managed service that AWS offers for you to perform compute services in. What a managed service once again means is that a lot of the configuration is done behind the scenes, and it's something that you don't have to do, but it's also something you don't have the option to do for Lambda. A lot of that is done on AWS's end. So because Jim needs more control than that, this one isn't the best option. EC2 instances, however, are highly flexible, highly configurable virtual machines. You can control just about everything about an EC2 instance, and this sounds a lot more in line with what Jim's looking for. Now, ECS, or Elastic Container Service, remember that runs with Docker, and Jim didn't mention anything about needing Docker for this scenario, so that most likely wasn't the best answer here. And then finally, there's Lightsail, which is an extremely abstracted version of EC2 where you don't have to manage a lot of the configuration details. Since Jim needs more control than that, this wasn't the best answer either. And let's move on to number 2. Company A is looking at moving their storage solution to AWS. They are a long-term storage software as a service company with clients that don't need frequent access to their data. They're looking for the most cost-effective solution to host documents long-term. What is their best AWS storage option? Is it S3, EBS, Glacier, or EFS? Once again, feel free to pause this video for a moment and consider your answer. And the answer here is going to be 3, AWS Glacier. So let's go down the options and find out why. Remember, the key points in this question are that Company A is a long-term storage company, and they're looking for the most cost-effective solution to host documents long-term, and their clients don't need frequent access to their data. So if you recall, Glacier was a long-term storage solution that offers very cost-effective long-term storage and infrequent access. S3 is a great option for object storage, but it's not geared specifically toward long-term cost-effective storage, so it's not the best option here. EBS, or Elastic Block Store, does have persistent storage, but once again, it doesn't have a pricing model that's geared toward long-term storage. And the same goes for EFS. It's highly scalable and highly available, but it's not meant as much for infrequent access long-term storage as Glacier is. And number 3, true or false, AWS will manage the OS level patches of your EC2 instances. And this one is false. Remember, for EC2 instances, which are instances that you control completely on your end, operating system level patches are one of the things you're responsible for. One of the very few exceptions to this is Lambda. Number 4. AWS will manage DDoS protection for your AWS hosted application. Is it true or false? And And this one is true. Remember, DDoS protection is one of the things that AWS will handle on their end per the Shared Security Services model. And 5. You have been tasked with helping Company A move their application to AWS. Company A's leadership is concerned that moving their application to AWS will prevent their ability to stay fault-tolerant and highly available, since they won't have physical control over their infrastructure. Which AWS service can you inform them about that will address this concern? Is it EC2, availability zones, edge locations, or shared responsibility? And this one, of course, is availability zones. Let's go over the options. EC2 is a virtual machine and doesn't have much to do with being fault-tolerant and highly available. You rely on other parts of AWS's infrastructure to manage those things. Remember that availability zones are physically separated compute clusters separated in each region, so that if you deploy across multiple availability zones, you're achieving fault tolerance and high availability. So this sounds exactly like what we're looking for. Edge locations were the locations around the world that are good at serving end users your cached content quicker. It's a great service, but it's not what we're looking for high availability. And finally, there's 4, shared responsibility. So we call this answer the, if you chose this one, you might want to watch the module again answer, because that's exactly the case. Shared responsibility, while it does address things that can become fault tolerant, is not a service that directly contributes to fault tolerance or high availability. It just describes which part of your security you're responsible for and which part AWS is responsible for. Alright, I hope you did well on this quiz, and if all of it makes sense, then feel free to move on, and we'll cover some basic resources that'll be helpful to you in the future.